Scott Moe is the Premier of Saskatchewan. Hello.
Hello, Catherine.
Now, there is so much chaos right now in Washington surrounding Donald Trump's agenda. I wonder, as you speak to industry leaders today, to what extent is the anxiety over tariffs in Canada even on their radar?
I think it's pretty real. And I think it really speaks to the understanding that, whether it be the energy industry, the manufacturing industry, the agriculture industry, and various stages of each of those industries, how integrated we are across the 49th parallel, how integrated the Canadian-American economy is. And it's very well understood by, industry representatives, industry leaders, and those involved in, all of the aforementioned industries. So it's very, very real at the industry level. And it's incumbent on them, as well as us as Canadian politicians, to ensure that the policy and decision makers in Washington, D.C. and across the U.S. understand that just as well.
So are you trying to change any minds while you're in D.C., or is this about recruiting cheerleaders for Canada?
Well, this is about changing minds, and changing minds not just in the short term, but changing minds for the long term. We have a great North American economy. And we traditionally have, not just for the last number of decades, but for over a century, have created value together. Not in spite of one another, not in place of one another, but create value, and we create energy security, and we create food security and manufacturing security together. And that is what we are reminding our allies and the decision makers within the President Trump administration, as well as congressmen, Senate members, and governors across the nation. And that's what we've been up to the last couple of months, and that's what we're certainly up to this week.
But when you listen to the president, he doesn't say, "Oh, it's so wonderful we're doing this together." He's saying, "We don't need you guys. We could do this ourselves." How do you change a mind in the face of that?
Well, that's why we need to make sure that the folks that might be in the room when those decisions are made understand to the full extent what the consequences of decisions like blanket tariffs across the board, what those consequences actually are. It means higher inflationary costs for not just Canadian families, but American families as well, at the gas pump, at the grocery store. And ultimately, any sustained environment where there's tariffs in place are going to mean job losses, and not just north of the 49th parallel, but are going to mean job losses throughout the U.S. as well. That's how integrated our economies are. And that's really some of the nervousness, I think, that you will find in industry leaders, many of which we've met with not only today, but the last number of weeks.
If Donald Trump does enact steel and aluminum tariffs, essentially any minute now, how would you like to see Canada respond?
Well, we'll have to have a discussion with the federal government with respect to, is this a response that, does include, some type of tariff response? I would be very wary, and I am very wary of any counter response that involves tariffs for the sake of tariffs' sake. Tariffs are not helpful, whether President Trump is putting tariffs on aluminum and steel, or whether the Canadian government in some way is counter-tariffing. Tariffs are not helpful for what it costs you and I and Canadians and Americans to live each and every day. But they're also not helpful when it comes to how our economy works from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective. And they do mean that some people will lose their jobs. So we should be very, very wary about any conversation. First, I would say with tariffs, but second, from Canada's perspective, any counter tariffs, because they have an equal impact on jobs and opportunities that we have as North Americans.
You seem to be, Premier, in the political minority on that front. When I think about what I'm hearing from the different political parties, I know both the Liberal leadership candidates have talked about a strong response. Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh. There are discussions about how hard to punch back, but you hear this argument, well, Donald Trump doesn't respect weakness. How do you stand up to a bully? How do you intend to change the minds of people in the Canadian federal government or across Canada to see your perspective on this?
Well, there has been some discussion about very targeted tariffs that would have an impact to change, if you will, the hearts and minds of policymakers in the U.S. And at the end of the day, that's what needs to happen is, there are certain policymakers that need to convince the president that these tariffs are harmful to Americans, not just Canadians, but are harmful to Americans as well. And so, the very targeted discussion around potential tariffs is one that is fine. But the the larger opportunity that we have in this very tenuous and challenging and sensitive discussion is, and what we should be discussing as Canadian leaders is how do we get back to where we want to be, which is a non-tariff environment. So let's talk about, the advantages of not having tariffs, whether they be President Trump's tariffs or counter tariffs, on the general North American economy. Let's look at.
So are you all carrot, no stick then, Premier Moe? Is that what I should understand?
Oh, no. When we have the discussions about some targeted tariffs, those very much are a stick.
Okay.
But they're targeted. They're not broad blanket tariffs, which are harmful to everyone.
Okay. You're not just going to Washington, D.C. You're also headed to Mexico. We know things have been a bit awkward, perhaps a bit tense between Canada and Mexico. I'm thinking particularly when Ontario's Doug Ford talked about essentially cutting Mexico out of NAFTA. How touchy is the relationship right now, would you say?
Well, I think there's always sensitivities in any relationship. Mexico is a significant market for Saskatchewan. We do over $1 billion of exports to Mexico, and they are, a valued trading partner. That's why we have a provincial office, trade and export office that operates in Mexico. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time there as well, meeting with decision makers. As one, they're a large market for us. Two, they're the third partner in the USMCA agreement, which we're going to get to renegotiating here in the not too distant future. And I would point to really Mexico helping lead that agreement to fruition last time when we were down there with a number of premiers alongside Chrystia Freeland. And it was really Mexico that found our way to an agreement on USMCA, and then Canada really came in after the fact.
Okay. Interesting. I do want to turn back to this question of the relationship between Canada and specifically Donald Trump. The comments he's making, the 51st state, more and more we hear him talking about Canada not being a viable country, talking about the idea that, their military wouldn't necessarily defend us. Do you think Donald Trump is a threat to Canadian sovereignty right now, Premier?
No, there is the only threat that could ever be to Canadian sovereignty is ourselves. We should never be putting ourselves. And first, let me clarify: under no circumstances do I think Canada should be a 51st state or could be a 51st state. But we should make sure that we don't put ourselves in the vulnerable position where that kind of talk can even be considered. And by vulnerable position, I mean we need to make policy decisions. And you can ask yourself about the policy decisions we've made over the last number of years. We need to make policy decisions that prioritize our strength, prioritize our ability to be energy secure as a nation, food secure, and manufacturing secure. I don't know that all of the decisions that our current government has made have been focused on enhancing our economic security, enhancing our energy security, and enhancing the strengths that we have as a nation. And so Canada is a great independent nation, a nation that we continue to support for sure as Canadians in the province of Saskatchewan, but we also support the broader trade relationships that we have with a country like the United States. So any waffling that might happen there is due to a lack of leadership or a lack of focused policy development in our nation's capital with our government.
One of the ways that the federal government is trying to sort of firm up Canada's muscles, I guess, at this point, is this talk of interprovincial trade barriers. Anita Anand, the minister in charge of the file, has said they could be knocked down essentially within the month. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, it would be much more than has been achieved over the last number of decades. And listen, we're looking to remove as many of the exemptions, if not all of the exemptions that Saskatchewan has as part of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. The federal government has the most, and to their credit, they've been committed to reducing that to under half. I think they have 40. We have about 7. But the largest interprovincial trade barrier that we have in this nation is our inability to build a pipe and to have a highly functioning rail system and port system so that each Canadian industry has reliable access day in, day out to our ports and to Canadian customers. And so, the fact that we've had policy decisions that have inhibited our ability to provide, in our case, our interest as Western Canadian energy to other Canadians is a failure a failure in leadership of the Liberal government. Now we see them changing their position, leadership candidates, and even the Minister of Energy changing their position on national infrastructure like pipeline infrastructure, Energy East infrastructure. But they've been the problem. And they've been the holdup for far too many years in the largest interprovincial trade barrier that Canada has, our ability to get energy back and forth.
So first of all, Premier, I'm not sure that answers my question about 30 days. I see your passion on the issue, but in terms of the timeline, realistic or no?
It is realistic to remove a large number of exemptions that are in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Again, that's much on Minister Anand, is a large number of them are the federal governments. But there's other provinces that need to be equally committed. If we're going to go down to 1 or 2 or 3 from Saskatchewan's perspective, our expectation is that provinces that have 20 or 30 have a long ways to come.
Is there a particular province that you're pointing to there, sir? I know Quebec has added restrictions because of the emphasis on the French language.
Yes, there's a number of provinces, Quebec among them.
We've only got a moment left. You keep talking about pipelines, so I think I'd be remiss not to ask you. There is this renewed enthusiasm for a west to east pipeline, but there are no, as far as I'm aware of, commercial proponents. You mentioned Energy East. It's clear that project is dead, that particular project. It would have to start from scratch at this point. How likely, really, looking at the commercial environment right now, is it that we would see a west to east pipeline in Canada?
It's dead because the Liberal government killed it.
Well, there's also no industrial partner to take it on right now, right, at this moment, if we're talking about the future.
There was until the Liberal government killed it with the introduction of Bill C-69. And people should remember why we are vulnerable in this nation when it comes to being energy secure, why we have really an inability to participate in the energy dominance conversation that the U.S. Wants to participate in and wants to get to, is because of the policy decisions that we've made over the course of the last 9 years. And we need to remember that as we face quite likely a general election this year. We need to do better as Canadians in ensuring we are preserving our ability to be energy secure, food secure, and ensure that our trading partners value us as a nation and being part of that partnership.
Okay, we are right out of time. Premier Scott Moe, thank you for making the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much, Catherine.